The hinge bolts are in on this left wing. The fuel lines are all set up on it, hooked up. The flap cable is made up and put in the wing. I still need to hook it up to the flap belt crank. The other thing I need to do is hook up the wires for the landing and taxi and nav lights, and hook up the tubes for the pitot static system. So I've got to figure out which tubes are the pitot tube where they come out of the wing root and which one is the static tube. This is the pitot and static tube. The pitot tube here is this front one, this top one, and it's just opened up into the ram air, into the air pressure. When you move forward, you get ram air in there that compresses the air in that line and causes the airspeed indicator to move. This lower one, the back one, is the static tube, and that just has static air pressure, just the outside air pressure, and that gives you the outside air pressure for the altimeter and the vertical speed indicator, and it also gives the difference between the static air and the ram air, gives you airspeed. Well, I need to figure out which tube is which where they come out of the wing root there. I didn't mark those when I took them apart, so I have to figure out a way to do that. And what I've come up with is I've taken a piece of tape and put over those tubes there where they come out of the wing root. Now I'll take an air gun and blow some ram air into this tube for the pitot tube and see which one blows the tape off there. It doesn't hurt to do that now because it's not hooked up to anything, but the last thing you want to do is to put any air in there when that thing is hooked up, or that'll ruin the airspeed indicator immediately. Even just blowing in it, putting your mouth over it and blowing in it, just the pressure you can generate with your lungs is enough to ruin that airspeed indicator. The same thing with the altimeter and the static air system. It's a good idea to blow those out when they're open like this because they can get plugged up. That thing can get water in it. Bugs, crap get in there and plug those lines up, and they can cause erroneous readings. So it doesn't hurt anything to blow them out once in a while, but you sure as hell don't want to do it when it's hooked up to the instrument. So I'll see if that worked. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, well, my idea didn't work at first, so we modified things a little bit. I was kind of worried that maybe I had a leak in this pitot tube up in here someplace because I couldn't get that air to flow through there, or I was using electrician's tape and the tape might have been a little too sticky and tough. Oh, I put this piece of heat shrink tubing on here which seals down to that pitot tube real good, and then I went and got some masking tape and put over the ends of those tubes. I already did this now without the masking tape, and I got airflow through it, so we'll see what happens now. Still not working. Alright, we'll try something different here. That worked. Now I've identified my pitot line. What I did was I took a piece of toilet paper and rolled it up, kind of made a little spit wad projectile out of it, stuffed one in each one of those tubes. Heck of a spit wad shooter. Anyway, that worked. That shot that tissue paper out of one of those tubes, so now I know which one is the pitot line and which one's the static line. So I marked the tubes where they come out of the wing root, and I took my air and I blew through these. Like I said, these are off. It doesn't hurt anything to blow through them, and because they do get water in them. This pitot line, air doesn't really penetrate that line. It doesn't flow through it. It just has air in it, and then air pressure as it hits against that, the ram air as it hits against that, compresses that. And so the difference between the compressed air here and the static air here is what gives you your airspeed indication. Anyway, and this is the static line, and both of those can get water in them, crap in them, so I blew those out to make sure there's no water in them or anything. Now I can hook up my pitot line and static line and know that they're in the right spot. And then the next thing is to figure out which one's the landing light and which one's the taxi light, and hook up my landing light wires and taxi light wires. So before on this, it didn't make any difference because I just had one switch, and when you turned the switch on, both lights came on. I want to change that and have them be able to be switched, each light, and there's two reasons for that. One, I don't fly at night with this, so I don't really need the landing light or the taxi light, but I use those for identification lights, for collision avoidance. When both of them come on, they both can burn out at the same time. So anyway, what I like to do is just to have one of them on, and then if that light burns out when I'm flying, I can turn the other one on, and that way I make sure I've got one good light all the time. Now the other thing is, I've thought about putting a pulse light system in there, and that's a system where it pulses between the two lights and makes it kind of like a strobe, and it really makes identification for people that are coming at you or something like that. It really draws attention a lot more than just having a steady light on there. But when I talked to the guy that makes the pulse light systems, he said you had to have independent wires going to each one of your lights and an independent switch on there so that it can switch back and forth between them. And those things actually extend the life of your lights when they're on. The main shock on a light bulb is when it gets turned on and turned off. That immediate cooling and immediate heating weakens the filaments in there and causes them to wear out faster, to break. So a pulse light system, it comes on in a pulse. It never gets to full brightness, and it never goes fully off, so it's just pulsing back and forth. So that extends the life out of the light bulb. So I just spent a while going through the documents and stuff on this, trying to figure out which one is the landing light and which one's the taxi light. And this thing is showed, I've got the construction drawings for it, the Piper drawings for building it, assembling it to the airplane. I've got the parts manual for both later model Cubs and the early model Cubs, and I've got the assembly manual for the L-21, and not one of them show which one's the landing light and which one's the taxi light. So I'm going to assume that this outside light is the landing light and the inside one is the taxi light. Like I said, it doesn't make any difference to me because I don't use either one of them, but it seems like that's the way it was on the Cessna. The outside one was the landing light and the inside one was the taxi light. And the reason there's a difference is because they're aimed differently. And in some cases there's a different bulb. For the taxi light you would use a floodlight, and for the landing light you would use a spotlight. Most of these early airplanes, they all use the same bulb, a GE 4509, which has a life of about 12 hours. So that doesn't really make any difference, but they are adjustable in there to where the beam points. Well, I got a couple of pieces of wire. I got my Odyssey battery out, got it sticking up on the wing there. I got one leg hooked up to the wing spar there at the seaplane lifting eye, and I'll take the other leg, the other lead, and test those leads to the lights until I figure out which one's the outboard one. So that'll tell me which light's which. And there's no danger in that with it sitting up there. Those fuel tanks have been empty for a long time and are purged out, so there's no fumes or anything there. There's no danger of a spark causing a fire, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for somebody with a full fuel tank or fuel fumes leaking around there. But okay, I don't have to test both of them because that tells me that one's the inside light, which we'll designate as a taxi light. And I think the other one's burned out anyway. Yeah, it doesn't work. And the nav light is kind of bland because there's only one nav light. Well, that's got to be it. Those are 10 gauge wires. All my wire splice stuff is up in the basement, up overhead there, put away. So I'm going to have to go up there and dig that stuff out, bring it down here. Oh, and I said all my wire splices were up in the basement. I wasn't totally accurate. I've got all kinds of wire splicing stuff, both here in the hangar and in the shop, but the aircraft quality ones were up in the basement. So I went and got those wires hooked up for the landing light, taxi light, and the nav light, and I just hooked the battery up into the battery tray and turned the master switch on and the switches on for those, and lo and behold, they work. Of course, the one I designated as a landing light doesn't work, but like I said, I think that bulb's burnt out, so I'll have to change that. Well, that light that I designated the landing light was burnt out. I took the landing light cover off, the lens cover off, to check it, and that needed to come off anyway. It was already dirty inside, but sitting out there on that wing stand, it was laying right down on that thing, and all of that washing and stuff, all of the dirt and everything ran right down in there, and that kind of got buffed a little bit. So I need to clean that up and polish it out. And once I got that lens off there, I could see that that one light was burned out, so I went ahead and took it out, and I put a new light bulb in there. I bought some of these LED lights that are direct replacement for those, I don't know what they are, PAR 36 bulbs, which is what a 4509 is. I was going to try those, so I got one of those out and I stuck it in there. I was kind of worried about it at first, that I get it wired up right, because my understanding LEDs is they've got to be kind of polarized. The positive and negative leads have to be on there right, and there was no indication on that bulb which was positive or which was negative. I just hooked it up and turned it on, and it works, so that is good. A couple little bits of advice on light bulbs is, number one, when you take an old bulb out, save those brass screws, the terminal screws on there, because invariably you're going to drop one in the tall grass or some place where you're not going to be able to find it when you put a new one in. And so those always come in handy. Save them up, keep them someplace where you know where they're at, where you can get them. And the other thing is, when you're doing wiring, don't short yourself on the wires. It's the only thing worse than fighting with short wires in one of those little receptacles, whether it's wiring in a house receptacle or underneath a car dashboard or here in a lighting bay. The only thing worse than fighting with short wires is having the runs and finding out the last guy that used the toilet before you used up all the toilet paper. So anyway, that is fixed. I can get that light bulb mounted back in there, the mount back in there for it, and I'm gonna, like I said, polish up that lens and stuff and clean everything up before I put it back on, so that's not gonna go back on right away. This wing is all done now. I've got, well, I still don't have the flap cable hooked up on there, so that's the one thing I have left to do. I've got the pitot static system hooked up, and I got my lighting wires hooked up, my nav light and my landing light wires hooked up. Those were the last things I needed to do, other than that flap cable. I finally got that light mounted in there. It turned out to be more of a challenge than I could have hoped. Of course, I fought with that wire on there. One wire is short, and it was just a pain to get on. And I finally got it on, and then I went to mount it in there, and it wouldn't mount up quite right. It's a hole in there, a metal piece that goes through, an aluminum piece, and it had this rubber gasket grommet around it, and this thing is just mal-shaped in there, and of course it's old and brittle, been in there since the airplane was new, I suppose. It wasn't fitting in there right. It wouldn't fit in on this, so I decided to put some new one on there. I took that one off, and I had this V stuff here that I'd got a few years ago to put on the other airframe to try to seal up the door. But we wanted to glue it here on the outside and have this V there against it so the door would seal against that and maybe stop the rain from coming in through the door. And it didn't work because we couldn't get it to, the glue to stick on it. The weather strips, man, we tried all kinds of things and they couldn't get anything to stick to it. But I could have used this maybe on that. I got some weather strip adhesive, cleaned this piece up that I found, had left over, and was going to glue it on. But then I thought I'd try something a little different. I got some weather strip to put on the doors, on the baggage compartment doors, and when I did, I saw this stuff here. It's kind of a welting, and I just bought this on a whim, thinking that if I build something, this stuff goes over a sharp edge and protects that. And so if I build something that I want to protect or something, I might be able to use this on there, or as a seal to go butt up against something, or who knows. I just thought that it would be a good thing to have. So I decided to try it, and I thought it might be too thick, but I put it on there and it worked good. It's got an aluminum spring or shape on the inside of it that holds its shape, and it actually just slides right over a sharp edge and forms right to it. So that worked good. And then I got to looking at the inside. There's a second hole goes through that plate, mounting plate on the inside there that the wires go through, and that had this rubber grommet on there, and it was old and brittle and falling apart here, and that keeps the wires from chafing into the metal there and maybe shorting out. So I thought I'd go ahead and replace it with this stuff, and so I did. I cut a piece of this and put on there, and that worked real nice, real good. Anyway, that fit up in there then after I got it up there. Still had a pain with that short lead wire. The hot wire is short on there, so it was kind of a pain getting it. But I got everything in there, got that thing mounted, and it still works with all the fumbling around with it and stuff. So anyway, that's done.